US Consulate General Mumbai logo on the top left, Rising Flame logo on the top right. Honoring Helen Keller by Understanding Disability. Friday, March 26th, 2021, 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Thank you for signing in. We will begin shortly.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Ben East, the Director of Public Affairs at the U.S. Consulate General in Mumbai. Welcome to the panelists, Nidhi, Priyangee, and Niyar. We look forward to hearing your perspectives today. Let me also thank our sign language interpreter for providing this invaluable service. To begin, I'd like to welcome U.S. Consul General David J. Rands. Mr. Rands joined the U.S. Consulate General in Mumbai on August 27, 2019. A native of New York and career diplomat since 1992, Mr. Rands is a member of the Senior Foreign Service, class of Minister Counselor. Mr. Rands previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, covering India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and Maldives in the Bureau of South Central Asian Affairs, and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Pakistan. Prior to that, Mr. Rands was Director of the Office of Pakistan Affairs. Mr. Rands' previous assignments include Chargé d'Affaires AI, Acting Deputy Chief of Mission, and Counselor for Political Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, and Spokesman and Counselor for Public Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Mr. Rands has also served in Rabat, Jerusalem, and Karachi. Mr. Rands was the 2004 recipient of the U.S. Department of State's Herbert Salzman Award for International Economic Performance and has received 6 State Department Superior Honor Awards and a U.S. Department of the Army Commander Award for Public Service from retired General David Petraeus. Mr. Rands graduated summa cum laude from Yale University in 1991 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and received a Master in Public Policy degree from the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University in 2005. Mr. Rands is married to Tali Lind, a Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Agency for International Development, and has 2 children. He speaks Arabic, French, and Hebrew. Once again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Over to you, Consul General Rands.
Thank you very much, Ben, and good afternoon to everybody participating. Thank you for joining us to celebrate Women's History Month, a month during which we in the United States celebrate women's contributions to our nation's history, culture, and society. The U.S. Consulate in Mumbai is pleased and proud to partner with Rising Flame and the esteemed panelists for this discussion, which honors the legacy of one of America's most remarkable historical figures, Helen Keller. Born in Alabama in 1880, Helen Keller lost her sight and hearing when she was 19 months old. At a time when simply being a woman would have posed difficult barriers, Keller overcame the additional hurdles associated with being deaf and blind, going on to become a prolific author, disability rights advocate, and political activist who had a tremendous impact on American society. The world over, women and girls with disabilities experience double discrimination based on gender and perceived capacity. This both limits the opportunities offered them and places them at higher risk of gender-based violence, maltreatment, and exploitation. The barriers to their advancement are not just about physical access. They are often hidden within individual assumptions and organizational policies. I believe that we arrive at a more desirable outcome and create better societies if we begin with the premise that all members of the human family are created as equals and that each individual has the equal right to opportunities to develop his or her unique talents in pursuit of their dreams. But we must go further and recognize that in some cases, special accommodations are required to ensure opportunities truly are equal. The idea that failing to accommodate the needs of those with disabilities equates to discrimination is the foundation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, which became law on July 26, 1990, and has transformed US streets, buildings, and mindsets for over 30 years. The ADA represented a groundbreaking civil rights law prohibiting discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. For 3 decades, the ADA has guaranteed that people with disabilities in the US have the same rights and opportunities as their fellow citizens, protecting individuals with disabilities, just as our laws protect individuals on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, age, and religion. The ADA broke down barriers to access and opportunity, enabling millions of Americans to employ their talents and skills and contribute to strengthening the economy. As a result, Americans with disabilities have the right to access the same schools, hospitals, jobs, transportation, stores, and recreational facilities as their non-disabled friends and family. Higher education is essential to empowering all people and should be as accessible to people with disabilities as for those without. Partially as a result of the Americans with Disabilities Act, US universities offer classroom and campus environments that are accessible and welcoming for students of all abilities. The United States continually reaffirms our commitments to promoting and protecting the human rights of all, and to achieving equal opportunity in education, employment, and participation in civic life for persons with disabilities. But even in the case of the ADA in the US, inclusion cannot be a top-down initiative alone. It must involve a supportive environment and community. Achieving inclusion requires all of us to play a part, and it starts with learning about the real barriers that people face, which is why we are here today. I would like to thank all of the panelists for your time and kind attention, and the viewers online for joining us. I sincerely hope each of us comes away from today's event a little better prepared to continue the legacy of Helen Keller and support the work of organizations like Rising Flame to build an inclusive world that celebrates diversity, shuns discrimination and abuse, and provides equal opportunities and access to all. Thanks, and over to you, Nidhi.
Thank you so much for this fantastic introduction, and really excited to be here and be partnering with the US Consulate on such an important topic in this important month. I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm Nidhi Goyal, the founder and executive director of Rising Flame. A little about Rising Flame before we dive into the event and why we're here today. Rising Flame is a nonprofit based in India, which is committed to working for advancement of rights of persons with disabilities, with a focus on women and youth with disabilities, recognizing that gender and age can add marginalizations to people's experiences. I would like to refer to the last line that the Consul General ended with, inclusion and access for all. A socially integrated environment and access to all, promoting and protecting human rights of people with disabilities includes this. And that's a part of the vision, mission, and action that Rising Flame takes. We're a young nonprofit organization, but with a team that has a rich history of living with a disability, working with the community of people with disabilities, chronic illnesses, and mental health conditions. We are here today to discuss in this very, very specific month to honor women who have faced struggles, to learn from their experiences, and to grow together as a community, as a society, with the commitment to integration and inclusion. We all have heard of Helen Keller, and we look up to Helen Keller. We've heard Helen Keller's stories, struggles, the path-breaking life that she has led. We will come to why we are here today and what do we see in education of women and girls with disabilities today, looking back at Helen Keller's journey. Just for everyone who has joined us virtually, We have put in place accommodations to make this webinar accessible. If there's anything else that you would need, even now, if you could just drop a line or write in the comment section, we will try and put some measures in place or cater to the accessibility needs. We really thank the sign language interpreters. We have our first interpreter here, Monica, and we have the entire consulate team and the Rising Flame team here to support you. Let me begin with a quote by Helen Keller. What is education? She says, education should train the child to use his brain, to help him make for himself a place in the world and maintain his rights, even when it seems that society would shove him into the scrap heap. This comes from a place of struggle. This comes from a place of going through the struggle and working with it to find solutions. This comes from an era where probably discriminations were higher, where rights-based legislations were not in place in countries like United States and India. This comes from a place of empowering and leaving a legacy for other women with disabilities to follow. But what happens when education that can empower you to exercise your rights, that can empower you to live a life fully, that can empower you and promise you a brighter future? What happens when this education with this potential is denied to a large group of population? For the next hour, we will discuss the journeys of two amazing women here with me, and I'm very fortunate to be on the panel with the two of them, to really hear what it has been to procure an education in an environment that is partly accessible, that may be fully inaccessible, that was sensitive at times and disregarding at many other times. What happens when you live with a disability? Just to bring a few figures, we know that people with disabilities are massively undercounted in India. Civil society actors, people with disabilities themselves will share with you that the census data is not enough. It does not cover all of us for multiple reasons. As a society, we have stigma around disability. As a society, we have different definitions of disabilities from the global space. We're still working towards having global estimates within the country. The NSSO data of 2018 tells us that not just the enrollment, but also attendance, participation of people with disabilities is really, really low. So just 48.8% of persons with disabilities are literate by the definition provided of literacy. Only 62.9% aged between 3 to 35 years have been enrolled within a regular school. And there are extremely low retention rates for children with disabilities, with roughly 23%, or to be specific, 23.1% of the children currently enrolled attending schools. We're looking at dropout rates, which are 5 times higher than the other children. We're looking at an environment that where disparities exist depending on the gender of the child, depending on the disability and other factors. For example, girls with disabilities have a lower enrollment rate and a higher dropout rate, and so do children with cerebral palsy and intellectual disabilities. Many factors contribute to that. There is open denial of admissions, there are veiled denial of admissions under the guise of not having adequate systems in place to support the child with a disability. And of course, parents do not then want to enroll their children when the school has very kindly mentioned that they would not be the right people to train their kids. They will not be able to create an enabling environment. We do have the rights to educate, the Right to Education Act, which considers disabled children under the underprivileged category who have the right to not just procure an admission in a neighborhood school, but also have an equal experience of education. We're talking about If the denial of admission does not happen, we're talking about accessible environment, an enabling environment. There is often a barrier to accessible educational material, accessible infrastructure, or even inclusive sports and other extracurriculars activities because they're not designed thinking of diversity or children with disabilities. Full participation often does not happen in a physical environment. And now, in the times of COVID, we've moved to a digital environment, which seems very enabling for most of the world, which seems very enabling for many non disabled individuals. But that the full participation and inclusion of children with disabilities remains a challenge in the COVID era as well. Either parents are not able to provide for the technology, do not have the logistical ability or the skill set to support their children with disabilities who are quote unquote called as children with special needs to provide that support that they would need. There is also stigma and reduced worth of children with disabilities in societies, which is still evolving in many of our minds, where we've not tackled the taboo on disability. And so the stigma tells us that children with disabilities are often viewed as less worthy of investment, less worthy of education, have a less brighter future. And so in this COVID era specifically, they have been deprioritized if you compare them with their non-disabled siblings. If you compare girls with disabilities, they've been further deprioritized as compared to boy child with disabilities. And this can also be seen in one of the reports that was published by Rising Flame on the COVID crisis within India. Parents, like I said, don't have the skill, time, or means to support home learning. Accessibility of online platforms becomes the first barrier, but also online study material, which is not provided in an accessible format or used within digital classrooms. From our report, I can quote that one of our deaf-blind participants said that she has to constantly ask one of her family members to sit with her through the online classes because otherwise she would just not be able to grasp what is happening. There wasn't any sign language interpreter, no live captioner to support her. Just to say that the loss of routine, isolation from peers has impacted many, many children across the world, but it has disproportionately impacted the mental health, the social skills, and the abilities of children with disabilities, adding a huge level of risk, particularly to those children who have unsafe home environments. But what really works for children with disabilities and how we together can commit and pledge to providing that equal opportunity as their non-disabled counterparts receive is something that we would like to explore in this panel. What have been the experiences in the recent past? What have been the current experiences? And how can we move forward is a conversation that we would like to present to you. I'm Nidhi Goyal. I'll be the facilitator and one of the panelists as well. So I'm in a double privileged position today. As I said, I'm the founder and executive director of Rising Flame, a nonprofit based in India, and I work as a researcher, writer, campaigner, advocate, and artist. I've been very fortunate to be sitting on multiple intersections between disability rights and gender justice spaces. I work closely as a global advisor to UN Women's Executive Director in New York. I'm the president of a global women's rights organization's board called Association of Women's Rights and Development. And in India, I work as a core group member on disability rights with the National Human Rights Commission. Very happy to be here on this panel and be organizing this panel with two fellow activists, women, fantastic human beings, Priyangee Guha and Niyar Saikia. Welcome to this panel, Priyangee and Niyar. I would like to, just to lay out the structure of the panels, we'll have 10 minutes each to present our thoughts, to share our experiences of education, because I think the personal is the political is not just a mantra, it's a reality. And so bringing in personal experiences of how, with your own diversities, with your own disabilities, with your own conditions, how it was for you to navigate the education system. What were the positive and the negative experiences? What were the enablers and the barriers, if I had to put it that way? We'll go around 10 minutes each presenting on this, and then we will move to how we could look forward and make some solutions available for all of us, or as a community of educationists, activists, and committed human rights advocates. Over to you, Priyangee, and I'd invite you here. Priyangee, I'll do a very brief introduction, and I'd request you to introduce yourself, because I think that's the best way to start a conversation. I'd really invite you to share your experiences. Priyangee here is a lawyer and a stand-up comedian, and I get really excited because being a stand-up comedian myself, I get really, really excited to be speaking to other women with disabilities who've become turned into stand-up comedians. So lawyer, activist, stand-up comedian, Priyangee Guha, over to you.
Thank you, Nidhi, for inviting me to this panel. And Monica, if I go very fast where you're not able to catch up with the sign language, please let me know. My name is Priyangee. I'm a lawyer, and I also have postgraduate degrees in law and public policy. I have over 10 years of work experience representing victims of various violence. My core area of interest is child rights, and I am constantly eager to learn more about justice that heals and not justice that is based on vengeance. I'm also autistic. I am verbal autistic, which means that most times I'm able to speak. I got my official assessment last year, and it isn't very unusual for women to get assessed this late, because until recently, autism was presumed to be something that only is restricted to boys. And when I say I'm autistic, I am extra sensitive to sound and touch, and I'm very little sensitive to smell and taste. And it varies from person to person. Today, we are gathered here to talk about how to make academia more inclusive and accessible. And in the next 10 minutes, I'll try to cover some of the challenges I faced as an autistic woman in academia over 25 years. So it will be a challenge. Please bear with me. Before I begin, I wanted to make sure that I clarify some ground rules. Firstly, no two autistic people are same. And everyone knows that father's best friend's brother's child who is an autistic. Don't try to compare every autistic person you come across with that person. It is like me saying my father's best friend's brother's son is not autistic and that person is nothing like you. It sounds silly, right? Secondly, I know I'm invited to this panel because I made it into the world of academia despite all the hindrances, but I really want to be trying to convey that just achieving is not a criteria to get accessibility and support. Everyone deserves accessibility and support just by existing. Thirdly, autism is not same as being introvert or shy. Please don't confuse the two things. And fourthly, there is no cause for autism. There is no cure for autism. If someone comes and tells you, I have a cure for autism and I know what causes autism, please run away from that person. Fifthly, just look at everything I say today, or just look at everything we all say today from a place of love and care. We know teaching is a very hard profession. We know that there are some very deep systemic obstacles that you cross every day. It isn't a personal attack. Your profession is incredibly powerful, so powerful that even today, after years, I remember every good and bad things a teacher has told me. So please know that I come from a place of love and care, because we don't expect love and care from people we don't care about. On that note, let me give you a trailer of how my brain feels like in any public place, including schools and colleges. I request all participants to close your eyes. Imagine you are in a room where the walls are neon colored: red, yellow, orange, green, purple, blue, bright neon colored. The light is flickering in one corner. There is a tap in one corner where the water is constantly dripping. Tip, 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 tip. There's a loud washing machine somewhere in the corner, constantly making noise. Someone forgot to take the trash out, and it's piling up in the corner with a stinky smell. The water is tipping, machine is going on, there's smell. You're trying to adjust yourself in that room, and suddenly hear a phone ringing and a pressure cooker whistle. You don't have a key to exit that room. There's sound, there's smell, sudden sound, bright colors. A little bit too much, right? This is how the world feels to me. You can open your eyes now. What do you do when you're this tensed? You try to focus on your breathing. You calm down. You pace yourself up and down the room. You shake your hands a little bit. You try to loosen up your shoulder. In other words, you do something what we call repetitive behavior. Now imagine someone told you, you cannot engage in self-soothing activity like that. It doesn't look good. It's weird. And if you're a woman, they will say, it's not very ladylike. Why can't you just sit still? Funny, right? Now imagine you're attending a class in that environment. How much do you think you'll be able to learn? Imagine giving exams in that environment. How much do you think you'll be able to score? Do you know the funny part? I did all of that. And of course, I did not score in the top 10 or top 20 even. And yet I'm the one who was labeled lazy, inattentive, distracted, weak student, mediocre, and the list goes on. I am from a small town where in my school, there were about 2,000 students. Every day we had 8 periods, 45 minutes each, a lunch break, a toilet break. I loved the routine. Every day was predictable. But every period, there was a bunch of disconnected subjects that were taught one after the other. It was so confusing. I'll give you an example. I do not exactly remember in which class it was. So I'll guess somewhere in between 4 and 6. Let's say 5. Standard 5. We had a subject called moral science where the teacher told us random stories. And at the end of the story, each story would have a moral of the story. You know, like honest is the best policy, God helps those who help themselves, that kind of story. And that day, the moral of the story was, children are gifts of God. Fair enough. I was very happy that I'm a gift, with the presumption that everybody loves gifts. 2 periods later, a teacher, while teaching social science, told us, India is the second most populous country in the world, and the government has introduced schemes and policies for population control. And no one seemed to blink an eye. Up went my hand. Miss. Yes, Priyangee. Madam Sharma told us the children are gifts of God. Do you think the government has power to control how many gifts God can give to us? Now, till date, I will argue that the question was perfectly logical. The teacher could have handled it in so many ways. Do you know what she did? She threw me out of the class. 2 teachers sitting in the same staff room cannot figure out what lesson they want to impart. And I'm the one who goes out of the class. Great. Do you know the moral of the story that day was? Don't be curious. Just learn what they are telling you and move on. Compartmentalize. You killed the creative thought of a child that day. I mean, not you, the system. Schools I've also learned some bizarre rules of existing in schools. Did you know that apparently the only way to pay attention in a class is by maintaining eye contact with the teacher? Did you know that rocking back and forth or flapping or jumping is not something a lady should be doing, even if it is not causing any harm to anybody? Did you know that uniforms are very important for a child to learn how to live in the world? I mean, what are we trying to teach a child by making them choke themselves with tie and buttoned up collar in peak summer. I will never understand. Who makes these rules? Why do we follow these rules? Why are we not allowed to question the rules that we so religiously follow? I mean, throughout the conversation, I may not have an answer to a lot of these things because I have never seen an alternate system. But these are questions that are constantly there in my head when I am a part of an education system. Things get doubly complicated in colleges and universities. I left for home after my 12th to go to college. I not only had to manage my academia, I also had to navigate socialization on my own. We were a bunch of teenagers from across the country, from multiple cultural contexts. I felt like I was thrown into the ocean without being taught how to swim. Now I not only had to study well, manage finance, maintain good health by eating and sleeping well, I also had to learn the subtle art of small talks and chit chats, communications without speaking, otherwise known as body language, tones, facial expressions, sarcasms, innuendos, which I couldn't understand. So I began to do what every autistic person does. I began observing other people and copying them. I take meticulous notes on how to walk, talk, smile, shake hands, nod, blink, eye contact. I think we autistic folks are so good at copying and acting. I'm surprised no one has ever nominated me for the Oscars yet. I have no idea how, but I managed to pass one class after the other, one degree after the other. I'm 10 years into the profession. When you see my profile, you see a person who has achieved a lot of things. You see my degrees, you see my work experience. Um, I'm usually a lot more humble person, but you know what I'm trying to say here. What you do not see is the amount of effort I have to put in to achieve things as per rules not conducive to who I am. You do not see the effect it has on my health. You do not see the anxiety that this whole rules and conditions bring in. After 8 hours of school or work and 3 hours of homework, etc., I now need 12 hours sleep to simply have energy to leave. Why? Why is that? Because simply existing as per your rules is exhausting. Acting like I'm normal so that I don't get bullied is exhausting. Like Nidhi said, like I want access to all the things that a non-autistic person has. And for that, I have to pretend like I am non-autistic so that teachers don't come and tell my parents it is not my responsibility to handle her. And in order to get the same amount of access to do well in life, I need to pretend that I'm non-autistic, and that is exhausting. All this because the system refuses to acknowledge our existence, let alone provide us with support. How many autistic girls do you know? I know many. You probably don't know because we are perpetually exhausted and hiding in our own houses. The internet is full of them. You have a bizarre notion of what a good student should look like. You have a set of notion of what success looks like. You have your expectation. My parents have their expectation. My relatives have their own expectation. My neighbors have their own expectation. My neighbors have their own expectation. But no one has ever paused to ask me, hey, Priyangee, what is your expectation? Over time, I realized that what my teachers and peers highlighted as my weakness turned out to be one of my strengths. I now get hired for them. They are my source of income. Do you know why? Because we are the ones who dare to step out of the metaphorical box, tear it apart, and rebuild into something that you would have never imagined. Do you know what? Yes, we need you, but you need us more. The industry needs us more. The world needs us more. And it is high time that you make room for us as opposed to we making room for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyangee, for sharing that immensely personal journey. And I think it brings a moment of pause to everyone to think about how each of us move through this world and through educational experiences, and how each of our experiences will be and can, not just can be, but also will be unique. We can be different learners, we can be different people who perceive differently. Killing the curiosity of the child is a constant discourse that constantly is taken up with children, with parents, with educationists, with institutions, and so on and so forth. So, but what's really, really important is how, when the quote unquote normal box is not met, there is a pressure to emulate, there is a pressure to imitate, there's a pressure to portray high quote unquote normal functionality. And that's when the system accepts you. And so it's really important, because when we think about what kind of system do we want to create, which will come in around too, what are the barriers is very important to highlight. So thank you again. And with this, I will move to Niyar. Niyar is currently a student of in her final year BA, Bachelor's of Arts, and is also an actor. Niyar, I'd really request you to bring in your full introduction and tell us your current experiences, but also your past experiences to the table, for us to understand not just a pre-COVID and during COVID era, but also a school, a high school, and undergraduate sort of a mix of experiences. Over to you, Niyar.
Hi, I'm Niyar Saikia. I'm currently studying my final year in history. I'm also an actor, as Nidhi mentioned. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I have been acting. I have been in theater since I was 6 years. Since I was 6 years old, I have been trying to find my way. Trying to discover more in the field of theater. Since then, I also got my theater scholarship by the government of India, which is called a CCRT scholarship. It lasts for about 10 years.
Niyar, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to pause, because we're at the time to change the interpreters.
Yeah, sure.
Monica and Satya, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, Niyar, but it's just a access need. I'm sorry. Monica and Satya, we're just going to wait for 30 seconds. And Srinidhi, if you can just indicate once it's done, it'll be really helpful. By the way, for everyone, done? Sorry. Done. I also forgot to introduce my disability, so you would not understand the reasonable accommodation. I forgot to mention in my introduction that I'm blind. And so when somebody gives visual cues, it's not helpful. And that's why I requested my colleague to step in and just alert me. Over to you, Niyar, again. Thank you.
Hi. I have been doing movies and stuff for quite a while as well. The disability that I have is a speech disability, which is known as spasmodic dysphonia. And the very first time I heard it, I didn't know what it was exactly, to be precise. I just knew that that I was the youngest patient to have something of that. There was no communication done by the doctors as well as to have more information about it. But that was during when I was about 12 years of age, I think. And then it progressed further on and on to a lot of normalization on my part, because I didn't consider my disability as disability quite recently, because there has been a lot of normalization on my part, because I took in the ableist methods that were used in school, and in my theatre school as well, and I took it and saw that maybe it is fixable. Maybe it is my fault. maybe I have to work on it and just move past it. But now it just becomes so apparent that there was no forms of accessible methods which I could have used, which I could have worked on, which I could have at least made a directive space for myself, as much as I would have liked to. Um, Back in school, I start with school because that has the most like school has seen the most like the grave part of my disability. I was stripped of quite a bit of positions that I could have held, even though I had continued support from the teachers as well. But there was this sort of like lack in communication where I was always seen as someone that, oh, that's Niyar, like she might not be able to talk, she might not be able to communicate her her leadership skills. So let's put her in a box. Let's not give her the opportunity that she might as well seek. And I have heard that like right in front of me. And it's always big. I mean, it just became sort of where I thought that maybe I was at fault. Maybe this whatever that I have that I have going on, probably this is my fault. It's like the way people communicate with me. Even after repeatedly being communicated that it is a condition, it can be changed by drinking warm water or mixing honey with water, and like having like a cup of tea. It can be fixed that way. I mean, still teachers and my fellow classmates used to come up to me giving me advices as to what I can do about it. In a way, it was nice of them, but also in a way it became harrowing for me to process that, for the fact. Yeah, and then I come to my theatre school. So I'm a very realist person. I try to stick to my goals. I just try to stick to my what I believe can be something which I can access for myself. And I had dreamed about theater. I had dreamed about being a performer. I dreamed about being somebody on stage, particularly. So to lose out my voice completely, and to not have that space where I can at least where my theater mentors could at least understand that maybe maybe we can provide her a space where she can develop other theatrical skills as well, because theater is mainly grounded around the usage of voice. It's how you envision theater to be, like using your voice, using a voice to portray a character of your choice, portray a character of your director's choice as well. So to lose out my voice accordingly, and then not being given the space to at least work on maybe like body language of sorts, where I can use it to tell a story as well. So that became sort of like a hindrance for me as well, to not have like an accessible space where I can at least convey my story, where I can at least convey how I my acting goal as well. But when I came across my first doctor when I came to Mumbai, and I was diagnosed with spasmodic by then. then I was given medicines to heal my voice properly, because this is not this is just a better part of my voice, to be honest. It gets very claustrophobic, it gets very cloggy, and I'm not and but it's not like a discomfort for me. It's mostly like discomfort for the people. For it becomes some sort of a discomfort for them to listen to me. But gradually I started taking these meds. And I tried working on myself for that fact. Working on how I can use it, use whatever I had left of my voice to at least build up space for myself. So yeah, I mean, that crossed over to college. I think college was much more helpful for that matter, because nobody really questioned me as to what's happening with your voice, or when it's going to heal. Sorry. And I think that was such a satisfying moment for me, to not be questioned, where my voice lies at. But honestly, it also goes on to professors asking me to be louder, asking other people to help me out, to help my speech at the presentation as well, which I believe I could have done it myself, but it's always a discomfort which I in my head think that I might provide to the other person who's trying to listen to me. Yeah, so that's pretty much of my experience up until now.
Thank you so much, Niyar, and we'll dive deeper because there's definitely more experiences that we'd like to hear from you, particularly on the online education right now, and what could be the possible enablers in a theatre school, right? For example, when we say full participation, all-round development, all-round investment in education, it's not just the books, we're talking about everything else that comes with it. And if we have to explore sort of skill-based learning institutions, like theatre, music, dance, and many more such institutions. What are we looking at, and who are we making spaces for? Very important, and I just wanted to bring that here as a common experience that Priyangee, Niyar, and probably I would also bring in is really this idea of fixing, and that absolutely in our interaction. So this is not nothing to do just with educational institutions. This is to do with people, society, stigma, and possibilities. Somehow the idea that everybody else knows what the disabled person needs better than the disabled person, but also somehow that everybody else thinks more deeply about the disability and the cure more than the disabled person or their loved ones is a very, I find it a very funny experience, but that's only now because I'm a comedian. But it can also be very, very, I don't know, disconcerting. Traumatic may not be the right word here, but very, very disconcerting that you're going for a social event, that you're there in a space, that it's a day, and somebody just says, well, you don't know this, here is a cure for you. So, and this whole almost obsessive nature of cure, right? Like this obsessive conversation about, but this can be cured. I sometimes wonder, I live with blindness and somebody says, you'll get cured. And I'm like, but I know how to live with blindness. I'll have to relearn how to live with a sight. And it sounds funny, but it may be true. I don't know, right? So it's, I think bringing that, but also this idea of it is our fault, like living with that feeling of it is my fault or the burden is on me is a very strong sort of pressure, a very dominant pressure on a student, or in many circumstances that a woman with a disability, a person with a disability faces. And this idea of not just not investing in them, but also not having full participation. So when you say, leadership opportunities, we often don't see opportunities like that being given to persons with disabilities for their capabilities. I'll keep my interventions really brief so that we can do the second round with Niyar and Priyangee, and then open up the last 15 minutes for Q&A. I acquired my blindness when I was 14 or 15, and apologies again for forgetting to introduce that. It's just to say that, everybody says it may be a devastating experience. And like I think my fellow panelists said, I didn't fully understand what that experience is, right? We all understand what life is. We understand what college looks like or university looks like once we go into university or once we experience that. Similar was with my failing sight, and I didn't know at what stage, what kind of experiences would I need, right? It simply meant that within an educational institution, for my full participation, what would have probably happened if the students were sensitized? If the students were sensitized, I probably would have not faced, the labels of weird, snob, and so on and so forth. Because when somebody looks at you and you have a failing sight and you don't smile back or you don't recognize them, immediately the person either feels you have a big quote unquote attitude, you think highly of yourself, you have a problem, you're weird. And at that teenage period, everybody wants to be this cool person. So if you're anything other than that cool person, you're anyway typecasted as weird and not like them. My blindness contributed a lot to me having a smaller social circle, despite many efforts of participating. So I had a solid foundation with a brother who was blind, who said, don't sit back, don't let it, just go and participate in whatever you can. And then you figure out how you can do it later, but just jump into it. And that's what I did. I jumped into extracurriculars in my undergraduation. And then I tried to figure out. And I remember this one person, the first senior, because there were these student clubs. And I told the first woman who was senior, and I said, listen, I want to tell you something, because you'll expect me to make charts and publicity material and pamphlets for the events, and probably I might skip, miss, delay, etc., because I have this condition. And she was really shocked, and she said, listen, don't worry, I will not tell anyone. And I wasn't sure if I was happy with her response or not. Dealing with your own shame maybe, or like hesitation around disability, and then people's reactions, your fellow students' reactions, adding to the shame and guilt of the disability. And that this is probably a very, very small incident. Cut to, I started confessing to my professors because I looked quote unquote normal, which is something that people tell me now, and they feel like they're giving me a big compliment, saying, oh, but your eyes look normal. You don't look blind at all. And people really think, including teachers, students, staff, that this is a compliment that you can give someone, that you look normal. And sometimes I really hate it, because I find it harder to procure accommodations, because apparently, quote unquote, I don't look blind enough. That's something I learned over the period of time, but this is also an incident, and I'm going to just piece it together, my intervention through stories. And I remember it was an English literature class, and I'd shared with my professor that I have a failing sight, and please, when you're picking out people to read in class, forget about if they have anxiety, if they're able to, if they would like to. Of course, this is an exercise that every student should go through. And so I alerted her in advance, and that please do not pick me, because I wouldn't be able to read, and it'll be a huge embarrassment. Then there were the Diwali holidays, in which apparently the professor completely forgot about it and picked me out. And I can tell you that that may not be the most humiliating experience, but it was one of the most emotional experiences in my undergraduate life, where I was picked out in front of 100 people, and someone who loves talking and is a people's person and never has stage fright. To stand there, not being able to read, was a very, very complex level of embarrassment, one of the inability, which got spotlighted suddenly in front of public. Second was the shame of being a public speaker and sort of standing still and silent in front of people. So it's far more complex. And when I tried to remind her in a whispered tone, I remember I said, ma'am, I'd really shared what my problem is because the ableist lens had made me believe that this was my problem. I really came from a non-disabled life to a disabled life. I wasn't speaking rights language then. I said, ma'am, I'd shared what my problem is. And I tried to whisper, you at least try to gauge the discomfort of a student, what they're trying to say, to which she responded very loudly saying, I don't remember what you spoke to me, but anyway, if you can't read, just sit down. And I remember walking out of the class humiliated, going to the telephone booths because at that point we didn't have cell phones, and sobbing for 20 minutes to my family saying, I don't think I can go back and face that class ever again. Cutting to before every exam, finding a scribe. Now, finding the scribe and seeking permissions, despite a high court judgment then, and now very, very open laws available that students with disabilities need to get XYZ reasonable accommodation. The onus of finding a scribe, writing permission letters, procuring that permission was on me. And I say this, and I continue to say this, that in the period of examinations where students would run around revising, copying last minute notes, and so on and so forth, invariably before every exam, it was an exam not just for me, but for my parents as well, because either one of us was at the college, one of us was at the university. One of us was at the hall ticket collection center. One of us was at the center where my exams are supposed to be held to ensure that they had this notification in place. To which I remember in a post-graduation, one of my professors said, oh my God, Nidhi, I think you must be having nerves of steel by now. And she again meant it as a compliment. I don't think I took it as a compliment, and I don't take it today as well. The force on students with disabilities to not just absorb the burden of an inaccessible environment, and I choose every word in this sentence very deliberately. It is the inaccessible environment is a reverse burden that you're adding disproportionately on a student with a disability. It is not on other students. The library is available for all students, but it was never available for me with my failing sight or with my blindness later. And just the last in a couple of lines with which I would end is, I applied for post-graduation in mass communications and media, and it is extremely important because when I said in the beginning, in the introduction about denial of admissions, and I was 23, I think, or something like that, I was already very strong. I'd found what I wanted to do, so I was really excited to start doing it in my career because when I was diagnosed, I had to switch from this dream of becoming a portrait painter to now not knowing what to do. And I think I discovered it at 22, 23. Finally, I arrived at it. And I wanted to pursue a post-graduation in mass communications and media, to which the head of department of the course invited me 2 days before the entrance exam. And said to me that she doesn't think I could do this course. I remember that conversation because I humbly asked why. And she said, because everything was visual. And so when there is a team making a documentary, what would I even do? And I said, does every team member go behind the camera? She said, no, but. And she didn't have an answer to complete the but, right? And so on and on, we went in that meeting where I realized that the head of department had no idea, had not done a basic Google search engine research on how disabled people function, how blind students could study. And when I showed her my screen reader software, she was absolutely amazed. She was like, wow, this is amazing. And I was like, no, this is normal. It's just that you don't know about it, right? It came to a point, the meeting concluded when I said, are you trying to say that I cannot apply to the course? And I think my tone hinted at a legal thing where my brain had not thought of a legal recourse, but I think my tone suggested, and that's when the panic started and said, we cannot legally deny you anything. You can apply, but we don't think you'll be chosen. I got chosen to that course and I seriously considered not taking it up because I was sure that such a hostile environment would not be productive on either side. Cut to, because the expectations were so low, when I handed in my first assignment and I scored the third highest in class, the conversation spun around and became from Nidhi Goyal being a loser to being fantastic and amazing and inspirational, both being very equally harmful stereotypes that are attached to disabled students. My coping technique was that I do not let the criticism impact me and I do not allow the compliments to impact me. And two incidents with which I want to end here. And I remember that I scored the highest in a cinema paper. In a cinema theory paper. And of course, there was no official support given to me for understanding the whole silent cinema that we had to view every Thursday. My batchmates, some of them at least, were good and supportive, and they supported me. The rest of them cut cues, thinking that they could cut cues of a blind person, and she would not know, would flick notes from my laptop, which was unattended when I used the washroom. But also, when I scored the highest in the cinema paper, surprise, surprise, a blind woman, explaining cinema better than the other cited how it was looked at. And when she started reading the answers, descriptions that I'd written for the class to say, this is how you're supposed to critically evaluate cinema. The next statement was, okay, yeah, but this paragraph probably should have been the opening paragraph. But anyway, I've given this woman full marks because, we give some marks for blindness, discrediting every effort that I had taken. That entire course taught me, and I still live with that fact, that if I had failed that course, no other blind student, not that they've given an opportunity anywhere now, but with the awareness and the consciousness that if I fail that course, no other blind student would ever, or disabled student would ever be accepted. And this is a huge burden. People say I have a right to education. I say I have a right to failure as much as any other student has. And that is a bigger problem, inequality, that we really face. There are many more instances of hostile environment, and just to echo what Niyar said, I wrote the script for the first group assignment, which is a play, and I remember one of my classmates, group mates, called me and said, we have a problem, you're the narrator, but we think we want to test you. You have to read the script aloud for us to see that you will not mess up with our group assignment. My conclusion is that if they could do something like this with someone who is outspoken, rights-based by then, confident young person, what chances do disabled people with lesser quote-unquote normal-looking disabilities, with lesser confidence, with other diversities, what space do we have for them? With this, to think of solutions, Priyangee, for the next 10 minutes, I would spend with you and Niyar 5 minutes each to find solutions, and then we'll go to the audience for Q&A. Priyangee, over to you.
Thanks, Nidhi. As far as solutions concerned, I think before we begin to address the solution, what I would request the people who work in academia in any form to take out 10 minutes of their time whenever they have time to note down why they work in the role they work and what do they want their students to achieve while the students are under their care. The reason I say this is because there seems to be a stark difference between what you want the students to achieve and what they are actually getting. And I'll tell you why. In school, why did they make me by heart the periodic table? Did they truly believe that if I were to become a scientist, I would not have access to the copy of the periodic table? And why is a man always throwing stones from the top of the building in math subject or physics? In college, why did they make me by heart all the names of cases and section numbers in law school? Did they somehow envision a situation where all database of case laws and laws would crash one day and I would have to quote it from memory? Isn't school much more than syllabus and textbooks? Schools are ecosystems that allow students to learn how to navigate the world. But considering that about 50, 60 people have signed up for this event and a bunch of other people are going to watch it later, I'm presuming that those who are engaging with us today and later are interested in change. You're interested in learning, you're interested in knowing how you can help an autistic student. And before I begin, I want to say that even I'm in the process of learning about what I need myself. So a lot of this is a guesstimate of how my life could have been better if things were different. Now, with that in mind, I would say, first of all, research, research, research. There are education systems across the world, including in India, where they have inclusive policies. There are practitioners and experts, including the Rising Flame team, who can help you create an inclusive policies. The best people to learn are from the neurodiverse crowd themselves. Like I said, a lot of neurodiverse people are online, on YouTube, on social media, Instagram, Twitter. Check out actually at a autistic hashtag, for instance. Read research papers, collate them and make them your standard for practice. When you're going to higher level meetings, advocate for your students. Secondly, question everything. For some reason, our education system discourages us from questioning. Question your definition of success, failure, good student, bad student, good behavior, bad behavior. Every teacher has an ideal student in mind, someone who scores well, does co-curricular activities, listens, obeys, dresses well, cute looking, that teacher's pet. You think you're being subtle, but you're not. We notice everything. Thirdly, at a more managerial level, have infrastructure, have a designated area where there is no sound. Like I said, I'm extra sensitive to sound. I wake up sometimes because I am breathing too loud. I'm that sensitive. Have designated area with no sound where they can cocoon themselves, recover from the overstimulated environments of schools and colleges, because schools and colleges are overstimulating with bright colors, canteens, laughters. Provide screen readers. I find screen readers extremely helpful because it helps me focus on what I'm reading and my mind does not go to that lizard on the wall, that butterfly in the garden. Allow them to record classes so that they can watch it at their own time, in an environment that they deem fit. Provide in-house counselors and educators proportionate to the number of students. If you are a school of 2000, don't provide them one counselors and expect the counselor to counsel 2000 students. Provide information in multiple format. I know it sounds funny. I'm a lawyer. I read thousands and thousands of pages every day. And yet here I am telling you, give me screen reader and multiple format information because I'm a flowchart girl. I translate everything into flowcharts because that's how I process information. Blocks of text and my mind goes blank. When you create these infrastructure for neurodiverse folks, even neurotypicals can benefit from it. You know that one day you have a very bad headache and you really, really want to be in a quiet space where nobody will disturb you. Where do you think that space is coming from? Be flexible. If a child is not maintaining eye contact, don't use your preset standard. If they are like shaking their hand, is it really disturbing anybody? Don't tie them up with your standards. Have an option for part-time learning. If it's a 5-year course, provide an option for part-time learning where they can finish it in 8 years or 9 years. It's 2020. We are all in lockdown, and this is the year we have learned that time is a social construct. There is no such thing as time, right? So now utilize that learning and give space, give clear instructions, give clear feedback. I remember getting feedbacks like can do better. What does can do better mean? I have never understood that. Help them break out bigger tasks into smaller tasks. If it is an essay writing, tell them 2 days for reading, 2 days for writing, 1 day for editing. Help them in their tasks. Go beyond textbooks. Teach them how to socialize, how to interview, how to reach their full potential. I remember in my school, the same group of girls would get selected for singing, dancing, games, because they didn't the teacher didn't want to invest in other students. They never came to me and asked, Priyangee, is there a problem? Can we help you in some way so that you can do other stuff that other children does? And lastly, and most importantly, be open to learning. Consult with other professionals, psychologists, learning experts, consult with other neurodiverse people. This one shoe fits all, like a cookie cutter system that we have, is not working. And before I end, I want to say, I have been trained to accommodate others, like I said. Now it is your time to accommodate us, don't you think so? And if you think that if you provide these infrastructure to autistic people, it will get misused, empirically speaking, and purely empirically speaking, chances of your infrastructure being underused is much higher than the chances of your system being overused or misused. But lastly, do not base your system on pity. Use your accessibility as foundation. Use it as a norm, not an exception. Like I said before, you need us. The world needs us. And for once in my lifetime, I want to live a life where I'm not an inspiration. I'm just a regular human being walking down the street, accessing things like other people can access, and living with love and living with care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priyangee. You've really, really summarized a lot of important things and given us concrete action points, which are really important, and a concrete shift in mindsets that's required. Niyar, I'll come to you to really look at from your current experience and seeing what, how online and offline works, how spaces can be made, not just very, very traditional educational spaces, but capacity building, skill building spaces can be made inclusive for students with diversities.
Yeah. For me personally speaking, online classes has been really helpful for me for the very fact that for a year I didn't have my meds with me, because of which I couldn't really communicate on a vocal level. So the accessible method of using the chat, the chat option to at least communicate the answers to the professor has been really helpful for me. And then having the option to write down notes on the computer, on the laptop itself, because I had this like a tremor in my right hand, because of which it's very difficult for me to take down notes, basically. So it's convenient for me to use electronic device, to use that as a form of writing down notes, of doing that. And this had been discussed with a professor of mine back in college itself, because I didn't know that we would be given access to using a laptop for an exam if I didn't have a learning disability, because it's always specified that learning disability people can only use in another person or a laptop for that matter. But then the professor asked me, your writing is very illegible, and then I told her that I have an issue, and then she said, like, would you like to try an option of using a laptop? And I was like, I'd be really happy to, but I didn't know that even there was an option for that. So I think these options should be made available for everyone out there, for everyone who has normalized their own disability, who tries who has these invisible disabilities, uh, um, like for me having a disorder of that sort. Also, if I have to talk about in theater for this matter, I think it's easier to access new forms of theater, new forms of videos, new forms of plays, which have been telecasted on YouTube for that matter, because it gives me the chance to look at other look at other forms of theater as well, like be it musicals, be it other forms of tragedies, be it other forms of Shakespearean plays. To have that access to have a look at it for that matter, to be given like public access to it, it always becomes sort of helpful for me. Also, I'd like to mention uh, how theater is like mostly restricted to using the voice as a medium of performance. I, even though there are other performances group which focuses on mime, which focuses on puppetry, but it's not much like not much funded for the matter, not much not much celebrated for the matter, to give people access to other forms of theater as well. For example, just by using your body, you can express a story. But so I think theater schools need to at least cater to that, cater to that as well. Cater to other forms of theater as well, so that other people with disabilities can also have a look at it, can also explore that, and also work on it accordingly. For schools, for the matter, I would just like for the teachers to leave us alone, to not just give us remedy for everything and everything. Like, so we had this motto in school. It's like learning beyond the classroom, which didn't happen. It just restricted us to us to being us to us being us being, like being projected in a certain way. Um, there were like even though I was culturally active for the matter in school, I I I mean I had to make my own space in there. I had to go up and like be and like tell them, no, I want to do this. I want to be able to work in a street play. I want to be able to dance in that performance. Um, I also want to be able to like speak something in an assembly. Like just read out like a news or something. So I think for the very matter, when you say learning beyond the classroom, you also need to be aware that you really need to practice it. Need to incorporate everyone out there, and not just dumb down students to being rude, to being to being ill mannered for that matter. Um, and to have that sense of has it like the presence of mind to at least um give the people the opportunity and to be careful with the words you use, not just especially giving like remedies all the time. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great. Thank you so much, Niyar. And I think combining both, and it's very difficult to summarize the summary of what both of you have presented, but also to think really from the lens of, and I'm speaking as an activist here, shifting roles again, that really combating internalized stigma. Each of us being a part of society has stigma for other groups that we have all internalized. The percentages may be low, high, and an internal reflection, a constant internal reflection and challenging internalized stigma is extremely important even before you start researching and learning. And I think the second step, I think one of the steps that Priyangee mentioned was research, was to really find out how diversity within schools, and if you've done that already, it's fantastic. Maybe that goes hand in glove with combating stigma, but combating stigma and research become top priorities. It also becomes a priority to sensitize. So it's not just the student with a disability having a relationship with the teacher or the institution. It's also the student with a disability having a relationship with their peers. And so sensitizing to a very important part of building an enabling environment is sensitizing the peers the cohort, neither treating the student with a disability as someone below the rest of the cohort or above is extremely, extremely important, and explaining to the students that creating an enabling environment, allowing or putting in place systems where someone like me could have a scribe, someone like Niyar could take exams on a laptop, is not a special, quote unquote, special provision that is being made. It's only a part of enabling environment. Like a student would have access to elevator if the college building was 10 floors high. Empowering not just the peers with information, but also sometimes students with disabilities, because as an educational institute and educationists, we are in a grander position of power, and the possibility to have more information. So already being aware and prepared, not when the student with a disability seeks admission, but having this knowledge beforehand is extremely important, so that we are more welcoming and possible to work together in an integrated fashion with a student with disabilities. So really what I'm saying is proactive information, proactive engagement is extremely important. And just to give an example here, when I went for my master's to the London School of Economics, I came back from my first meeting with the students' accommodation office, the disability office, and I was like, oh my God, I never knew that someone said, learning is your job and tell us how we can make that learning possible. You focus on the experience and we'll take care of the rest. And that was never said to me as a student with a disability, or never said to any Indian student with a disability then. Now, at least we have institutions who are trying, who've been able to put in place some measures, who really want to be proactive and so on and so forth. But most students with disabilities never hear this. They hear, it's your problem, we will not make any special arrangements for you, or here's the special extra mile that we had to go because of you, adding to the guilt and the problems around disability. And the last and the final thing would be to have alternate ways, accepting alternate ways of not just learning, note-taking, the whole experience of a classroom, but also taking exams and participating. And I'll end at a recommendation to a video. You know, the experiences being shared here reminds me of one of the experience, and we should really go back, and this really ties together everything, because this is of a student who had studied, and this is a couple of years ago, in the US. And she says, I'm a Palestinian living in New Jersey, and living with cerebral palsy. So I have all of these disabilities. That one, I'm a woman. Second, I live with cerebral palsy. Third, I'm a Palestinian, a Muslim. And fourth, I live in New Jersey. She's a comedian called Maysoon Zayed, a performer and comedian called Maysoon Zayed. And she says, she shares a very similar experience to what Niyar shared, and also the basis of the experiences that Priyangee and I have been sharing. And she said that I really wanted to be an actor, and every year I would go and never get the role. And in 8th grade, if I'm not wrong, from her speech, from her TED talk, she says that finally there was a part to play in the drama, because they were writing a drama about a girl with cerebral palsy. And I was literally born for that part because I was a girl with cerebral palsy. And she goes to audition and she doesn't get it. And the reason that she's been given is that, you know, some of the stunts that the character has to do, she will not be able to do it. And so the hilarity and the difficulty of the situation is that we somehow have made spaces for certain people and are finding it more and more difficult, or difficult, just not, if not more and more, in our own heads and systems, to accommodate or to include other ways of being, other ways of performing, other ways of learning, just diversity. To end, I'd like to say that there are two things that disability rights movement says. One is nothing about us without us. So when you're putting systems in place, asking disabled people what really helps, would help in building an inclusive system. But also the second thing, that universal access is important, because that means that you're not just putting accessibility for the disabled student, you're adding an accessibility probably to welcome the disabled student or to create an enabling environment for the disabled student, but each student in your class would benefit from that. And that is why it's called universal access. We'll see more and more students participating in extracurriculars. We'll see more and more students performing better. We'll see more and more students getting curious, more and more girl students entering non-traditional, areas which are very challenging for certain genders. And so it's really important that access and inclusion is seen as a need of the entire institution and system, and not as a need of this minority group who's often unseen, invisibilized, and not accounted for, right from participation to leadership. I'll pause here. We'll take about 2 questions. We're hoping that all of you can stay with us for another 10 minutes, and I would invite Srinidhi Raghavan, my colleague and co-leads program in Rising Flame, to read 2 questions for our panelists.
Hi, everybody. We have received 2 questions. I think one of the questions is directed towards Priyangee. Priyangee, the question is, do you think we are still busy hiding our girl children who are autistic, or are we slowly moving out of that closed space? That's a question directed directly at you. And the other question that is there is for all the panelists. How do you deal with people telling you to get over your disability? Yeah, those are the 2. There is another question, but if you answer these 2, then I can
We can just circle back with you. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. Priyangee, over to you first, and then we'll see if Niyar wants to take the second question, or you'd like to answer it as well.
The short answer is yes, we are still hiding girls with disability, primarily because the standards that are set for in order to assess whether a person is autistic or not is very male centric. The understanding is very male centric, and the understanding is also very medicinal and curative in nature. As recently as last week, I came across this incident where a very popular mental health institution was charging a parent for quote unquote behavioral modulation of an autistic child, which is a long and expensive way of causing more harm to the child than good. It is basically trying to teach the child how to not pretend, how to hide their autism and to act normal. So to answer your question, no, we are nowhere near even acknowledging autism in girls.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Priyangee, for that response. I would like to go either to Niyar or you if you'd like to take the second question around how do you respond to people who constantly ask you, how did you overcome your disability?
Should I go ahead?
Yes, please.
I mean, the first time that I was asked was by my doctor itself. He's like, you are acting, it's your hobby, so it's okay. You'll get over it. That was the first time. So, and so later it culminated to me thinking that, okay, maybe I am doing it like out of habit. And then after diagnosis, of course, it came to light. But the very fact that I always think about maybe I can get over it, always normalize that me because it's a very rare condition, it's a very rare disability, because of which I haven't gotten like into a conversation with someone who has spasmodic, whom I can discuss my experience with, whom I can at least share whatever I felt throughout these years. But obviously it gets too much, of course, when people say that you just have to drink some warm water to gurgle, and then you'll be fine. Of course, it gets to me, but yeah, I think I learned to like live with it. But now like I'm learning how to at least learning to be at least aware of where the other person goes, like went wrong, and I can like at least communicate with them. You don't have the right to say that. So yeah.
Priyangee, short response. Thank you, Niyar. I think I was smiling because I was thinking of a comedian's response, but the whole thing around you should overcome your disability is can be very problematic and traumatic at the same time. So thank you for sharing. And Priyangee, I wanted to see if you had a quick response on that.
For the downside of having a late assessment is that I never got a support as a child. The upside of having a late assessment is I got at a stage in my life where I really don't care about other people's opinion. Like you said, we are thick-skinned, and we neither compliment nor insult affects us at this point. And another plus side was because I got my assessment last year and immediately went into lockdown, I really didn't interact with human beings after that. So I've not been subjected to get over it. But if I do, like, I don't think I will, because I look very scary and I'm a lawyer, and generally people don't say get very scared of me. So yeah,
Sorry. Looks scary. Thank you for that image description, Priyangee. I immediately shifted your image in my mind.
Yeah, I have a very resting bitch face, so I will continue to
Oh my God.
give
Okay.
that whenever I hear it.
No, but I think I would really say it's blindness. It's not constipation. It's get over it means I really don't know, but I can't really recall when people have told me to get over it. And I think, that's why I keep saying I'm a very privileged disabled person, because of the confidence that I come from, the kind of family that I have, the environment that is around me, or whatever else, right? Get over it was something that nobody has, at least I can't recall, or I've dismissed it so much that I've been told that disability will bring challenges, just get over it and learn to live with challenges. Like, that's something that I've been told. And I'm like, cool, you know what? Like, if you can't be a part of the support system, you rather not be a part of the destructive system. So I think it's really, as a disabled person, you constantly create circles of care, and you see who you want to interact with and who you don't. I've also often seen that disabled people are labeled as aggressive, because when somebody says get over it, we react. And if you react, you're told, but why are you overreacting? This was said out of love. And I think that constant, taking away the agency, the choice, reinforcing stigma on a disabled person, and then saying, why do you react? And you're very aggressive if you react. You're not assertive, you're aggressive. And also this boundary of blurring a woman in my position, the way I speak. Another woman is called a very assertive, strong woman. Many a times I've been called an aggressive woman, because somehow we have these images of disabled people being absolutely docile, being someone who accepts being pushed around, decisions made for them. And when a strong disabled person challenges all that, it's a lot to handle. And so we go into reverse labeling. So I think all of this is a very complex space of stigma, reinforcing stigma, labeling, reverse labeling, and so on and so forth. But sometimes it comes from a space of care, and then we just negotiate with it and try to very gently unentangle and explain. And if somebody gets it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. You also come to a point where you choose your battles, you choose which discriminations are okay for you and which are not. And I'm saying all of this with very, very consciously, because it's a constant negotiation of which discriminations will you stand up against, even in a position of privilege and power. I'd like to pause here, but also circle back that we have Srinidhi, we basically are out of time. So
yeah, but we have two questions if you want to.
Okay,
One
maybe you can quickly share. Yeah.
Yeah. One question is for you about your social experience at college.
Mine.
About making friends, accessing campus, etc. One is for you, and the other one is for Priyangee, about suggestions of how girls and adult women who think they might be on the spectrum can receive both diagnosis and support. Do you have any suggestions? Yeah.
I think Priyangee will switch over to you first and then I'll go.
I will tell you what I did. I researched a lot on, and I found a therapist who knows how to work with autistic folks, and I will primarily begin with that. Secondly, I will say that formal assessment is not necessary for you to access help in terms of support for autistic folks. There are reliable online tests. If you contact me, I can share it with you. But my first and foremost suggestion would be find a therapist who is well versed with, who has experience with working with autistic folks, and start from there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Priyangee, and thank you for that question from our audience. For me, just to make the campus accessible was, getting orientation. So in London, I had a mobility instructor to take me around the campus because our campus cut across like 4 or 6 streets. I can't even remember how many. So really having that orientation, 2 weeks of mobility instructors supporting me. In Mumbai, it was a straightforward building, so I could sort of, the accessibility of the campus became something like that. But also, because we don't have many accessible or many pieces in place for accessible infrastructure, people become the accessibility enablers. So my friends supported me to get across the street, to catch the right train, to be with me to disembark the train, and so on and so forth. But they were the ones because of whom I could clear my undergraduation, where accountancy was a piece and nobody ever thought that I could do accountancy on Excel sheet, and I didn't realize it then. And I was taking sketch pens because I'd become low vision. So I was taking broad markers and sketch pens, and friends would help me. So socializing wasn't for a person like me who's extremely social and extremely outgoing. I think my social life was really poor in my undergraduation when I was figuring out what this low vision going towards blindness looks like. And I think socializing gets impacted by stigma as well. So in my post-graduation, not many people in my batch liked me because there's a strong disabled person. Again, it challenges all the imagery that you have of a disabled person, and that is not very easy to accept. So there was a lot of stigma, that was internalized stigma with my batchmates, and I hope they've moved on from there. But it was a very, very not such a great social circle. But also, I want to say that it's easier for an outgoing person like me who can go and strike up conversation with anybody. And if they respond, they respond. I think some of the basic challenges where you have to sensitize people, saying that, listen, if you're talking to me, don't just walk away, because I realize after 2 minutes when I've paused that I'm speaking to thin air. Just say, hey, I'll be back in a minute, right? So bringing such smaller tips from my end and having a circle of support. So when not everyone knew I was losing sight, I had a few select friends who knew. So if there was an impossible task where I would fail, where a professor said, go fetch that professor from the staff room. Now I'm like, oh my God, that's going to be 20 blurry faces. I don't know who to pick. My friend would stand up and be like, hey, listen, I'll go and fetch them, right? So I think creating circles of support, having accessible infrastructure, if your institution's open, really talking to them and having the possibility to sensitize your peers would be the way to go. With this, we're going to really pause here because we are about 12 minutes over time, 13 minutes over time. And we have a vote of thanks, but I'd really like to end this with on a positive note, saying that there are many solutions. I think we all need to work together, and together we can really achieve integration within our learning institutes, within our educational institutes, within our skill building institutes, which is really the first step to creating inclusive societies, because we all then go and form a part of society. We all then go and become, professionals who are either employers or employees, colleagues or friends, neighbors, people living in the same apartment building. And if we have this inclusive environment in the beginning, if we have this understanding of support systems and interdependence in the beginning, if we're talking about an inclusive future that we all can contribute towards building. Thank you very much for being here. And I, as Rising Flame, on behalf of Rising Flame, I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of the entire team that's here, and particularly our co-leads program. So Srimati Raghavan, our co-leads program, our consultants, Anjan Mehrotra, Tejasvi Subramaniam, and Saima Hussain. Thank you so much, and the entire US consulate team, and particularly our sign language interpreters, and all of you for thinking together with us, for being here, for listening to us, because listening is the beginning of change. And on behalf of both our organizations, the US Consulate and Rising Flame, we'd like to say that we'll circle back with you, or we would like to circle back with each of you participants in 2 months to see what has been the impact. Has there been any movement towards change? And on behalf of Rising Flame, as Executive Director, I'd like to offer that any of you, if you'd like to reach out for more support, more information to build an inclusive environment within your institutions, within your cohort, within your programs, we're happy to be to provide support. You can contact us, or if you needed a connection with any of the speakers, you could contact us at team@risingflame.org. That is TEAM@rising, RISINGFLAME.org. We're also punching this in the chat box, and over to the American Consulate team. Thank you so much, Priyangee. Thank you so much, Niyar.
Thanks, Nidhi.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello, all. Wow, what an amazing program. My name is Anupa Godse, and I work in the public affairs section of the US Consulate Mumbai. I would like to thank our wonderful panelists for today, Nidhi Goyal, who also moderated. Hold on a second, let me just switch on my camera, which for whatever reason was not. Okay. So I would like to thank our wonderful panelists for today, Nidhi Goyal, who also moderated, Priyangee Guha and Niyar Saikia. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and powerful personal stories, and also discussing possible solutions to create inclusive campuses. Thanks also to Srinidhi Raghavan and the entire team of Rising Flame. Special thanks to the excellent interpreters, Monica Punjabi Verma and Satya Garapati. And a big thank you to all our participants. I'm glad we could gather today in March, the Women's History Month, to celebrate the remarkable life of Helen Keller and to talk about the cause closest to her heart. I'm sure today's program has provided a lot of food for thought and inspired us all. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Hope to meet you at another program in the near future. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Anupa.
Thank you for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe, and click the bell button for updates. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or visit our website to know more about our work. Links in the description.